Team, before we get into the vision for next year, I need to address something that's been bothering me for months. Some of you have been carrying this company on your backs, showing up every day with ideas and hustle. Others have been riding on reputation, missing deadlines, and creating more problems than they solve. That's why I'm giving Amanda the lead on the new Virginia expansion project. She deserves it. And if the rest of you can't step up, maybe this isn't the place for you anymore. Hi, my name is Lauren Bennett. I'm 31 years old. I sat there in the drafty meeting room of that old countryside inn in Virginia, the kind of place companies rent for team bonding weekends when they want everyone to feel like family. The fire crackled in the stone hearth like it was trying to warm up the sudden chill in the air. My boss, Richard Hale, stood at the front with his arms crossed, wearing that half smile he used when he thought he was being decisive. Amanda Torres sat 2 seats down from me, nodding like she had just been handed the keys to the kingdom, which apparently she had. The words hung there. No one said my name, but every person in the room knew exactly who Richard was talking about. I had been the one staying until 10 most nights for the last 6 months. I had been the one fixing the client decks Amanda presented as her own. I had been the one whose name kept getting left off the final reports. And now in front of the whole team, my boss had just told everyone I was the dead weight. If your boss has ever looked straight through you while telling the room you were the problem, you know the exact sound your own heartbeat makes when it drops into your stomach. Drop enough in the comments if you've ever sat in a room like that and felt the ground shift under your chair. I kept my face blank. That was the only power I had left in the moment. Richard finished his little speech, clapped his hands once like we were all supposed to move on, and launched into the next slide about synergy. Amanda turned her head just enough for me to catch the quick, satisfied glance she sent my way. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. We had been playing this game for months, and she knew she had just won the public round. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of words I couldn't quite hold on to. When it finally ended, people stood up slowly, stretching, murmuring about the snow starting to fall outside. I stayed in my chair until the room emptied. Richard walked out without looking back. Amanda followed him already, talking about next steps in that bright, eager voice she used only when he was listening. I was still sitting there when Sarah Klein, our office manager, slipped back in through the side door. She closed it quietly behind her. Sarah was the one person who had never played the game. She kept the lights on and the printers working and somehow managed to stay invisible while seeing everything. "You need to see something," she said, voice low. She held out her phone, security footage from the main conference room last Tuesday. I pulled it after I heard them talking about restructuring your role. You should watch it before you decide what to do next. I took the phone. The screen showed the empty conference room at 7:12 p.m. Then Richard walked in, followed by Amanda. They didn't sit. They stood near the window, voices clear on the recording. Richard's voice came first. "She's getting too visible with the clients. They ask for her now instead of me." "We can't have that before the expansion?" Amanda answered without hesitation. "I've been feeding you the issues with her numbers for weeks. Just say the word and I'll make sure everyone sees she's the one dropping the ball." Richard nodded. "Do it quietly. Praise her in the big meeting so it looks fair, then highlight every small miss. By the time we announce the new lead, no one will be surprised when she's moved to support." The clip ended. I handed the phone back to Sarah. My hands were steady, but something inside my chest had gone very still. Sarah watched my face. "I saved a copy, if you want it." I nodded once. "Thank you." She left without another word. The room felt bigger and colder now. Outside the tall windows, snow was starting to stick to the pine trees. The weekend was supposed to be about alignment and vision. Instead, it had become the place where my boss and my coworker finished what they had been building for months, a quiet public way to push me out while making it look like my own fault. I stood up, grabbed my notebook, and walked out into the hallway. The old wooden floors creaked under my boots. Down the corridor, I could hear laughter from the dining room where the rest of the team was already gathering for dinner. Richard's voice rose above the others, telling some story about fresh leadership. Amanda's laugh followed right after. I didn't go to dinner. I went back to my room on the second floor, the one with the view of the frozen lake. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. The security footage file was already in my email from Sarah. I didn't watch it again. I didn't need to. I had heard enough. For the first time in a long time, I let myself feel the full weight of how long I had stayed quiet. Every time Richard had praised Amanda in a meeting while forgetting to mention my name on the same project. Every time Amanda had just wanted to run something by me at 8 p.m. and then presented it as her own the next morning. Every time I had told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that the work would speak for itself, that if I just kept my head down and delivered, someone would eventually notice. They had noticed. They just decided the story they wanted to tell was more useful than the truth. I closed the laptop. The snow was falling harder now, muffling the world outside the window. Somewhere downstairs, the team was still laughing. My boss was still rewriting the last 6 months of my life in real time, and I was sitting in a rented room in the Virginia countryside with a recording on my phone that could blow the whole thing open. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it, but for the first time, I wasn't wondering if I had done enough to prove myself. I was wondering how much longer I was willing to let them keep writing my story for me. I stayed in that room long after Sarah left, the recording still open on my phone like it might change if I watched it again. It didn't. Richard's voice stayed calm and reasonable the way it always did when he was deciding someone else's future. Amanda's answers came quick, like she had been waiting for the invitation. I closed the file, opened my email, and started scrolling back through the last 6 months. Every time Amanda had just wanted to loop me in on a client call that ended up with her name on the summary. Every time Richard had replied, "All with great work, Amanda," on work that had my fingerprints all over the data. The pattern was so obvious once I stopped pretending it wasn't there. I didn't cry. That would have been too easy. Instead, I felt something colder settle in the kind of clarity that comes right before you stop asking why someone is hurting you and start asking what you're still doing in the room. Downstairs, the team was still at dinner. I could hear the low hum of voices and the occasional burst of laughter through the old floorboards. I wasn't ready to sit at that table and pretend the meeting had never happened, but I also wasn't ready to hide. So I went down anyway, grabbed a plate from the sideboard, and took the empty seat at the far end of the long wooden table. Richard was at the head telling some story about a deal he closed back when the company was smaller. Amanda sat to his right, laughing in all the right places. He noticed me the second I sat. Of course he did. "Lauren?" he said, voice warm like we were old friends catching up. "Glad you made it down?" "Amanda was just telling us how she salvaged that Parsons account you were leading last month. Said you had handed it off when things got complicated. Smart move, knowing when to let someone else take the wheel." The table went quiet for half a second. Amanda kept her eyes on her plate, the picture of modest surprise. I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. Mark Sullivan, the senior analyst who usually stayed out of these games, looked up from his glass with something that might have been concern. I set my fork down carefully. "I didn't hand it off," I said. My voice came out even. "I built the model, ran the numbers, and stayed on the calls until 2 in the morning the week before the deadline. Amanda presented the final deck. That's all." Richard smiled the way he did when someone corrected him in public. Details, details. The point is the client's happy and the project moved forward. That's what matters on this team. Amanda finally looked up. "I couldn't have done it without the foundation you laid, Lauren." "Really?" The words were soft. The look she gave me was not. I didn't answer. I ate 3 bites of food I couldn't taste and excused myself before dessert. No one stopped me. Richard went right back to his story like the interruption had never happened. Sarah found me in the hallway outside the dining room. She kept her voice low. "He pulled me aside after the meeting, asked if I still had the old access logs from your laptop, said he needed them for documentation purposes. I told him the system only keeps 30 days. He didn't look happy. I nodded. Another piece clicked into place. They weren't just rewriting the past. They were building a paper trail for whatever came next. Thanks, Sarah. She hesitated. Thomas Reed is here for the whole weekend. He's been in the small library most of the evening. If you're going to say anything, he's the only one Richard still listens to. Thomas Reed had founded the company 20 years ago and still came to every major retreat. He was the one who had hired me, the one who used to pull me into his office after big wins and tell me I reminded him of himself at 30. I hadn't spoken to him one on one in almost a year. Richard had made sure of that. I thanked Sarah again and headed toward the library wing. The hallway was dim, lit only by wall sconces that threw long shadows across the worn rugs. I was halfway there when I heard voices coming from the small sitting room off the main corridor. Richard's voice first, then Amanda's, then a third voice I recognized immediately. Thomas Reed. I stopped just outside the half open door. I wasn't proud of eavesdropping, but I also wasn't stupid. Richard was saying, she's talented with the spreadsheets, no question, but leadership requires seeing around corners. Lauren gets stuck in the details. Amanda's the one who can take us into the Virginia expansion without dragging the old processes with her. Amanda added, I've tried to mentor her, but she gets defensive whenever I suggest changes. It's been hard on the team morale. Thomas's voice was slow or thoughtful. Has she had a chance to respond to any of this? Richard laughed once short and dry. She's been in the room for every conversation. If she had something to say, she would have said it. I stood there with my back against the wall, the words landing exactly where they were meant to. Richard hadn't just decided I was a problem. He had made sure Thomas heard the version where I was the one who refused to adapt. The version where staying quiet for months suddenly looked like proof I had nothing to contribute. I didn't go into the library. I turned around and walked back to my room, the floor creaking under every step like it was keeping time with my pulse. The next morning, the snow had stopped, but the cold had settled deeper into the old house. We were supposed to have a team alignment session after breakfast. Richard had scheduled it himself. When we all filed into the main room, he stood at the front again with a flip chart. Like this was still a normal strategy weekend. Yesterday we talked about fresh leadership, he said. Today I want us to go deeper. We're going to do a quick round of open feedback. What's one thing each of us could do better to help the team succeed in the expansion? He went around the circle. People gave the usual safe answers about communication and work-life balance. When he got to Amanda, she smiled and said, I think some of us could be more open to letting go of control on projects we've owned for a long time. It creates bottlenecks. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. Richard turned to me last. Lauren, your turn. The room was very quiet. I could feel Mark Sullivan watching me from across the circle. Sarah was standing near the door like she was ready to leave if things went sideways. I kept my voice steady. I think the team would move faster if credit and responsibility lived in the same place. When one person does the work and another person gets the title, the people actually doing the work stop raising their hands. Richard's smile didn't move. Interesting perspective. We'll circle back to that. He didn't circle back. Instead, he announced the afternoon activity, a 360 feedback exercise where everyone would write anonymous notes about their colleagues, and the notes would be read aloud in the group before dinner. Radical transparency, he called it. The kind of thing high-performing teams do. Amanda nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt the floor tilt, again the same way it had the day before. Only this time the tilt was deliberate and public and scheduled for 4 hours from now. After the session broke, I caught Richard in the hallway before he could disappear into another conversation. I kept my voice low but clear. Can we talk for a minute? Alone? He glanced at his watch like he was already late for something more important. Walk with me to the lake path. I've got 10 minutes. We stepped outside into the cold air. The path to the small frozen lake was cleared but still icy in patches. Richard walked with his hands in his coat pockets, looking relaxed. I saw the recording, I said. No point easing into it. From the conference room last week, you and Amanda. I know what you planned. He didn't flinch. He didn't even slow down. then, I'm trying to protect the company from someone who's become a liability. You've been checked out for months, Lauren. The clients notice, the team notices. I'm just the one willing to say it out loud. You're rewriting 6 months of work so you can hand my projects to someone who's been feeding you lines since the day she started. Richard stopped walking and turned to face me. The smile was gone. You had your chance to speak up in every meeting. You chose silence. That's on you. If you want to make this ugly in front of Thomas and the rest of the team, go ahead. But don't pretend I didn't give you every opportunity to fix it yourself. He started walking again. I stayed where I was, the cold biting through my coat. When I got back to my room, the anonymous feedback forms were already under the door in a neat stack. Richard must have had someone slide them in while I was outside. I picked up the top one. It was blank except for one typed line someone had already filled in. Lauren needs to learn that not every project belongs to her. The team would function better if she stepped back and let stronger voices lead. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. I sat on the edge of the bed with the papers in my lap. Down the hall, I could hear people moving toward the lake house for the afternoon activity Richard had planned. A casual team lunch at the private house on the property. Another chance for him to control the room. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Richard just told Thomas the feedback exercise is non-negotiable. He said if anyone refuses, it shows they're not committed to growth. Thomas didn't push back. I read it twice. Then I stood up, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door. I wasn't going to the lake house. I was going to find Thomas Reed before Richard could finish rewriting me in front of the only person left who might still listen. But when I reached the main lodge, Thomas was already walking out with Richard and Amanda on either side of him. Richard was talking, gesturing toward the frozen lake like the whole weekend had been his idea. Amanda laughed at something he said. Thomas nodded, listening. He saw me standing in the doorway. For a second, his expression shifted like he was about to say something. Then Richard put a hand on his shoulder and steered him toward the path. I stayed where I was, the cold air burning in my lungs. If I walked away now, I kept whatever dignity I had left. If I followed them to that lake house lunch, I was walking straight into whatever Richard had planned for the feedback session. Either choice felt like losing something I couldn't get back. I turned around and went back to my room. I didn't pack yet. I didn't call anyone. I just sat on the bed with the stack of blank feedback forms and the recording still saved on my phone, listening to the quiet of the old house and the sound of my own breathing. Outside, the team was heading to the lake house. Richard's voice carried faintly through the trees, already setting the story for the afternoon. I had until dinner to decide whether I was going to let him finish it. I went to the lake house anyway. The path from the main lodge was narrow and slick with packed snow. Most of the team had already arrived by the time I got there. The house was one of those renovated old barns, turned event space, open beams, big windows looking out at the frozen water, a long table set with sandwiches and coffee. Like this was still just a normal team outing. Richard stood near the fireplace with Thomas Reed, talking in that easy, confident tone he used when he wanted to sound like the reasonable one in the room. Amanda was beside him holding a mug, nodding at whatever he said. Mark Sullivan saw me come in and gave a small nod, the kind that said he knew something was off but didn't know how to fix it. Sarah Klein was near the kitchen stacking plates, her face tight. Karen Walsh, the retreat facilitator, who also handled HR paperwork when she wasn't running these weekends, was setting up a small table with index cards and pens for the feedback exercise. She smiled when she saw me, the professional kind that didn't reach her eyes. Richard noticed me last. He lifted his coffee cup in my direction like we were old friends. Lauren, good. We were just talking about how the team needs to get aligned before the expansion. Come get something to eat? I didn't move toward the food. I'm good. He shrugged like my refusal was exactly the kind of thing he expected from someone who couldn't adapt. Then he raised his voice so the whole room could hear. Before we eat, Karen's going to walk us through the feedback round. We wrote the notes earlier. Now we read them out loud. Radical transparency. No secrets on this team. Karen looked uncomfortable but nodded. She picked up the first stack of cards. Most were the usual corporate fluff: be more proactive, communicate earlier, celebrate wins together. Then she read one that wasn't. Lauren needs to stop acting like every project is hers alone. The team would move faster if she trusted other people to lead. Amanda's handwriting was neat on the bottom right corner. She didn't even try to hide it. Richard watched my face while Karen kept reading. Another card. Some people on the team create bottlenecks by holding onto control too long. It's not leadership, it's insecurity. The room had gone quiet. Mark shifted in his chair. Brian Holt, one of the newer analysts who usually stayed out of drama, frowned at his hands. Sarah had stopped stacking plates. Karen reached the last card in the pile. She hesitated before reading it. Lauren's been checked out for months. If she can't get on board with the new direction, maybe it's time for her to find somewhere she fits better. Richard smiled like the note had come from the universe instead of from the person standing 2 feet away from him. Honest feedback. That's how we grow. I felt the old pattern trying to pull me back under: stay. Quiet, let it pass, prove them wrong with work instead of words. But the recording was still in my pocket. The pattern had already won too many rounds while I stayed silent. I pulled out my phone. Before anyone else reads anything, you should hear this. I hit play on the conference room clip. Richard's voice filled the lake house calm and clear. Amanda's answers came right after. The plan to praise me in public and bury me in private. The part about making sure Thomas saw me as the problem. The room went completely still. Even the fire seemed to quiet down. Richard's face didn't change at first. Then the color drained from it. Amanda took a step back like the sound itself might burn her. Thomas Reed set his coffee down. He looked at Richard, then at me, then back at Richard. Play it again? I did. No one interrupted. When it ended, Thomas turned to Richard. His voice was quiet but carried. I've known Lauren since the day she started. She's never been the one to complain or politic. If this is how you've been running things when I'm not in the room, then the expansion isn't the only thing that needs to change. Richard tried to recover. Thomas, this is out of context. Lauren's been struggling. We were trying to protect her from what Thomas asked. From the truth, or from the fact that you and Amanda decided she was in the way? Amanda opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, she had nothing ready. Karen Walsh cleared her throat. I think we should pause the exercise. Brian Holt spoke up from the back. The notes felt off anyway. Half of them didn't sound like anyone here except the people who benefit from Lauren stepping aside. Mark Sullivan nodded once, short and sharp. I've been watching this for months. It's not just feedback, it's a setup. Richard looked around the room like he was counting allies and coming up short. His voice turned colder. If this is how the team wants to operate, fine. But don't expect me to keep carrying people who can't keep up. I looked at him, then really looked. The man who had once told me I had a future here. The one who had smiled while he let Amanda take credit, and then used my silence as a proof I didn't belong. The sarcasm in his tone wasn't new. It had always been there, just quieter. I'm not staying, I said. My voice didn't shake, not for the expansion, not for the feedback circles, not for any of it. I'm done letting you rewrite my work and call it growth. Thomas started to say something, but I shook my head. I appreciate you hearing the recording, but I'm not asking anyone to fix this for me. I'm just done being fixed by people who need me small. I walked out before anyone could answer. The cold hit my face like a second slap. I didn't go back to the main lodge. I went straight to my room, packed in 10 minutes, and carried my bag to the rental car. Sarah caught me at the door. You don't have to leave like this, she said. Thomas is talking to Richard right now. He might actually do something. I set the bag in the trunk. Even if he does, the room already chose sides. Half of them will still think I made it up or that I'm too sensitive. I'm not staying to watch them decide whether I'm worth believing. She nodded like she understood. Text me when you're back. I'll send the rest of your stuff from the office. I drove away from the Virginia countryside with the snow starting again in the rearview mirror. The radio stayed off. The only sound was the tires on the road and the quiet in my chest where the anger had been. By the time I reached the highway, the breakdown came. It wasn't loud. It was the kind that happens when you finally stop holding everything up. I pulled onto the shoulder, turned the hazards on, and let myself cry until my throat hurt and my hands stopped shaking. Not because I had lost the fight, because I had finally admitted how long I had been fighting alone while pretending it was normal. I had stayed quiet for months because speaking up felt like risking everything I had built: the job that paid the rent, the colleagues who used to feel like a second family. The version of myself that still believed hard work eventually got noticed. Richard and Amanda had used that silence to build a case against me in plain sight. The recording didn't save me from the loss. It just made the loss honest. When I could breathe again, I wiped my face, put the car in drive, and kept going. I didn't have a new job lined up. I didn't have a plan beyond the next exit. But I also didn't have to sit in another meeting and listen to my own contributions get handed to someone else while I smiled and took notes. The truth had found its way out through a phone recording and a room full of people who finally had to hear it. Staying quiet hadn't protected me. It had only given them more time to decide I was the problem. I wasn't going back to that room. Not the meeting room, not the lake house, not the version of the company that needed me, smaller to feel bigger. I was 31 years old and starting over with nothing but the evidence I should have used sooner and the quiet knowledge that I would never again let someone else narrate my work while I stayed polite. That was the only win I was taking with me. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever stayed silent because speaking up felt like it would cost you everything you'd built, and then realized the cost of silence was even higher, what did you do when the truth finally came out? Anyway, drop it in the comments. I'm still figuring out what comes after the breakdown, and I'd rather not figure it out alone